When you think of Bournemouth, you probably don't think much about them, yet behind the scenes is stuff that nobody has seen before. This is Team 7 of explaining the entire history of the Premier League. We're doing this with every single team, so if you want to see yours, make sure to subscribe. In 1890, a club by the name of Boscombe FC was founded during the Victorian era and was originally playing against local church teams. The name stayed for 33 years before the name Bournemouth was added, as it joined the Football League within the 3rd Division. Now, I could go into depth to everything that happened during this time, but to be honest, literally nothing happened. They hovered around the 3rd Division across not just a few years, but the next few decades. The club had limited finances and was practically impossible to get promoted. The highlights of the 50s was their historic FA Cup run, beating 1st Division teams like Wolves and Spurs before narrowly losing to Man United in the next round. This was the first time Bournemouth actually had some spotlight and recognition. Despite this, they remained in the 3rd Division across the 50s and 60s until the 1970s, where finally something interesting happened. But not the good kind. It began well as the club was renamed to AFC Bournemouth to mark a new era for the club. However, weak finances, limited squad development and a crumbling stadium led to them being a yo-yo club between the 3rd and 4th Division. It wasn't great and a change was needed, and that change came in 1983 in the form of Harry Redknapp. His man management skills, talent scouting and attacking football revolutionised the club. It began well as they won the EFL Trophy in 1984, their first trophy in the club's entire history. In the same season, they pulled off one of the greatest footballing shocks by beating Man United 2-0 in the FA Cup. This upward trajectory continued, and in 1987, Bournemouth won the 3rd Division League title and were promoted to Division 2 for the first time ever. History had been made. However, what was to happen next would change Bournemouth forever. Their time in the 2nd Division was rather short-lived. They played Leeds on the final day, with Leeds needing a win to get promoted and Bournemouth needing a win to survive the drop. The game ended in a narrow 1-0 win to Leeds, and riots broke out. Damage to the stadium was caused, as well as the fans and the club finances were strained following their relegation. Debts mounted, attendances dropped, and they struggled to pay their players. As a result, Harry Redknapp left in 1992 after falling out with the board as the club further declined. The 90s further emphasised this as the club continued to decline. In 2002, the club were relegated again to the 4th Division. They were now in debt of £4 million. Staff and players were laid off and the club was sent into administration. The only thing that stopped Bournemouth from being completely liquidated was the financial support of the fans. And after the club was promoted in 2003, the club was finally stable again. They sort of remained in the same spot for a few years before falling behind yet again. They entered another financial crisis in 2008 and were declared as in administration not long after. They were resultantly given a 17-point deduction ahead of the 08-09 season in League 2. They had no money, no owners and no manager. The club completely crumbled and were liquidated, marking the end of AFC Bournemouth. Or that's what they thought. They brought in a new young manager, Eddie Howe, who worked around the tight finances by signing young players or free agents. With 10 wins in 21 games, Howe performed a miracle. He beat Grimsby Town to secure safety, marking it as one of the greatest survivals in footballing history. But little did anyone know that this was the beginning of football greatness. Momentum built, and the next season they were promoted to League 1 for just the 2nd time ever. Eddie Howe left for Burnley and the club suddenly found themselves back to being in trouble. Eddie Howe returned 21 months later to meet a struggling Bournemouth who were fighting relegation in League 1. Within just one season, Howe made an incredible comeback and became known for his fast attacking football. After finishing 2nd, they were promoted to the Championship for the first time ever. History had been made and they weren't willing to give up now. They maintained stability within the Championship before in 2015, just 7 years after being on the brink of bankruptcy, the impossible happened. They had done it. They were promoted to the Premier League for the first time in their history. The small club from Bournemouth went from just a local team to competing with English giants. Eddie Howe was praised for his achievements. He trusted in younger players and was known for their high-pressing, high-attacking football. However, a new challenge awaited him. surviving the Premier League with one of the smallest budgets in the league. It wasn't going to be easy, but thanks to their star player Callum Wilson, Eddie doubled down and finished 9th the next season, the best finish in club history. They remained consistent throughout the next 2 seasons, cementing themselves as a mid-table club. They began well to the 1920 season, however injuries and inconsistent performances led to such a harsh decline. They failed to recover, and in 2020 they were relegated from the Premier League for the first time in 5 years. Following the relegation, Eddie Howe decided to leave for Newcastle, marking the end of the Eddie Howe era at Bournemouth. The club also had to sell a lot of their star players, meaning they had to completely rebuild from start to finish. Their first championship season saw them finish in 6th and were close to coming back up. However, they failed to get through the playoffs. They bounced back the second season, and under Scott Parker, Bournemouth finished 2nd and were promoted to the Premier League, mainly thanks to their main man Dominic Solanke scoring an impressive 29 goals. They defied all odds by surviving relegation and finishing in 15th. They built momentum, and thanks to Dominic Solanke once again, who scored 19 goals, Bournemouth finished 12th. After a bit of chopping and changing managers between Scott Parker and Gary O'Neill, the club decided to hire Iraola, who completely changed the club, helping them break records, finishing 9th with a record 56 points this season, as well as reaching the quarter-finals of the FA Cup. So with high prospect players, where will Bournemouth finish next season? While you think about that, why not watch this video right here? Everton FC are one of the most successful clubs of all time, yet they're never mentioned in any of the conversations. But why? This is team 6 of explaining the entire history of the Premier League. We're doing this with every single team, so if you want to see yours, make sure to subscribe. We have to go all the way back to 1879, where not Everton, but St Domingo Football Club was made for young men to stay fit during the winter months. As football grew, the name eventually changed to Everton FC and joined 11 other teams to form the first football league. They started strongly and consistently finished in the top half of the table across the 1890s. They won their first FA Cup in 1906 and the First Division twice. After World War I, just like all clubs, Everton were badly hit. Players and finances were hit and a rebuild was needed. They sort of hovered around mid-table across the early 20s before a certain player joined that would change Everton forever. In 1925, Dixie Dean joined Everton at just 18 years old. Now when I say the name Dixie Dean, the only thing you probably remember is the outrage that came after Sky Sports showed this graphic. So how good actually is he? Well, he scored 60 goals in the 27-28 season, helping Everton lift their 3rd title. Despite a slump a couple seasons later, they bounced back as Dixie Dean helped Everton dominate the English League. Following his departure in 1937, Everton really struggled without him as their form took a hit before World War II broke out. Following World War II, Everton were badly hit. They couldn't maintain any sort of form, and after poor results, they were relegated in 1950. It wasn't going to be a quick fix this time, however. It was a long road back to the top that they had to endure. They managed to climb back up to the top division in 1954, but failed to be much of a threat. This remained consistent until 1961, where Everton would never be the same again. The Harry Cartwright era, aka Everton's golden era. Harry Cartwright was appointed as manager in 1961. He had a tactical mindset and was a master of squad rotation. That, mixed in with financial support of new chairman John Mears, Everton were ready to not just survive, but dominate English football. It was an instant success, winning the league in 63 and maintaining consistent top finishes. He won the FA Cup in 1966 and to top it off, won the title again in 1970. With just under a decade, John Mears and Harry Cartwright turned Everton from a struggling side to one of the greatest clubs in Europe at the time. The league title was seen as one last triumph for Cartwright, as a mix of ageing players and player exits foreshadowed the decline for Everton. Cartwright stepped down in 1973 due to health issues, marking the end of their golden era. Across the 70s and early 80s, the club hired both Bill Bingham then Gordon Lee. Both did an okay job. However, after a decline in results, the club sat below mid-table. That, as well as not winning a trophy since 1970, the club grew frustrated over a lack of silverware. They needed a change, and that change came in 1981 when they hired Howard Kendall. The former Everton player brought a new approach to the club. It was a rough start as he struggled to show his vision. Fans began protesting against Kendall, and at one point he was nearly sacked. The board still had faith in him and kept him in the job. a decision that would go on to change Everton forever. This was the turning point. His plan was beginning to be seen as he brought home FA Cup glory in 1984, their first trophy in 14 years. It was looking good. However, what was to happen next season would change everything. The 84-85 season goes down as one of the best seasons in the club's history. They began by winning the league title for the 8th time. They followed up by winning the European Cup Winners' Cup the next week. They managed to reach the FA Cup final and face Manchester United. One game that decided whether Everton would be crowned as treble winners and be part of a historic group of just a few football clubs. And well, they lost. Yeah, they lost. Despite this loss, it was still an incredible season for them. The next season saw Everton come close to a double. However, a loss to rivals Liverpool on both the league title and the FA Cup denied them from that opportunity. It was still looking good. However, something was to happen in 1985 that would change Everton forever. The Heysel disaster. In 1985, Liverpool played Juventus in the European Cup final, a match which saw 39 fans lose their lives due to crowd violence. UEFA resultantly put a 5-year ban on all English clubs for participating in Europe. This affected Everton the most as their squad was at their peak. They could have easily dominated Europe, yet they were denied of doing so. This didn't affect them in England as they still won another league title in 1987. This was seen as the last hurrah for Kendall as he would go on to leave Bilbao that summer, marking the end of their golden era. The following years consisted of trying to find a good replacement, which proved unsuccessful. Kendall even came back in 1990, but it wasn't the same and he resigned 3 years later as the club struggled to survive in the top division. The 90s consisted of trying to survive in the new Premier League, with a random spike in the middle which saw them win the FA Cup in 1995. By the late 90s, the club was holding on by a thread. They survived on goal difference a couple of times and needed someone to turn this round. They called upon David Moyes in 2002, who was an instant hit, finishing 7th in their first season, mainly thanks to their new star boy Wayne Rooney. Moyes managed to carry Everton to the 4th place and earned Champions League qualification for the first time ever. Despite them not making much of an impact in Europe, Moyes managed consistent finishes ranging between 5th and 8th over the next 6 years. He made the most of star players like Tim Cahill, Michael Arteta, Seamus Coleman and more to deliver results under a tight budget. The Moyes era came to an end in 2013 as he would earn a move to Man United, starting a decade's worth of complete confusion. Across the next decade, they went through 7 different managers, each one following a similar story. They would join, do well in their first season, start the next season poorly, and were sacked. It got to the point where under Sean Dyche, Everton sat at 19th, deep into the relegation and were no longer competing at the top. They decided to sack Dyche and bring in David Moyes, who returned with the right vision for Everton. He turned their season round, nearly going his first 9 games unbeaten and guiding Everton to 13th place. So with the prospect of Moyes and new players coming in, where will Everton finish this season? While you think about that, why not watch this video right here? Sunderland FC are known to be one of the most iconic clubs in English football, and after their shock promotion this season, how did they get here? This is team 2 of explaining the entire history of the Premier League. We're doing this with every single team, so if you want to see yours, make sure to subscribe. We're going to go back to 1879. Sunderland was founded by schoolmaster James Allen and was meant to be just for school teachers. However, the year after, it was renamed the Sunderland Association Football Club and was now open to more than just teachers. They joined the Football League in 1890, where they found quick and early success, winning the title 3 times in their first 5 years and being nicknamed as the team of all talents. The growing team needed a big stadium, so they decided to move to Roker Park in 1898, which had a capacity of around 30,000, a huge number at that time. They retained strong positions in the league and had 5 league titles before World War I hit, as all games were suspended. Games resumed in 1919, in which, like many clubs, Sunderland had to recover from the losses made during the war. Players were injured or killed and finances were very tight. The 1920s in general were a struggle for Sunderland. They didn't sit and fight for the top, neither were they in danger of relegation. They sort of sat in the middle for a few years. They did come dangerously close in 1927, surviving by just 1 point. However, they managed to regain their old form around the 30s and won their 6th title in 1936. They continued this winning mentality, winning the Charity Shield and the FA Cup within the next 2 years. They were back to being one of the best clubs in England. They had rejoined the elites in winning silverware year after year, but after World War II hit, the club would never be the same again. After football resumed in 1946, Sunderland were once again affected. Players and finances were limited, and they had to completely rebuild, entering what a lot of people call the Bank of England era. Sunderland became known as the Bank of England club post-war as they splurged the cash in an attempt to rebuild the squad and return to their glory like the 30s. They broke the record signing multiple times, and by the early 50s, they had one of the most expensive squads in England. With all this spending, they surely performed well, right? Well, not exactly. Sunderland finished third in 1950, their highest finish since the 30s. Despite this, they massively underperformed. Criticisms came to light about how the club lacked discipline, and they had too many big stars that didn't work together as a team. But that wasn't the end of it, as 7 years later, Sunderland were to do something that would affect the entire club forever. In 1957, Sunderland were found guilty of making illegal payments to players that went over the salary cap. They were resultantly fined, with several club directors being suspended and even banned. The scandal completely damaged the reputation of the club and sent them into a downward spiral. The year after the scandal, Sunderland were relegated from the First Division for the first time in their 68-year history, marking the end of their dominant era. They struggled to escape from the Second Division due to there being no long-term plan. Managers were coming and going, with the players failing to work together. It was clear there was no easy way out of this, and that was evident as it took them 6 years to gain promotion back to the top division. But it wasn't like old times, as they failed to make any lasting impact. They rarely surpassed mid-table and wasn't really classed as a threat anymore compared to their golden years, and couldn't fight for trophies. It caught back up to them as they were relegated again in 1970, where it looked like they were gonna stay. They managed to shock the entire footballing world as they went on to win the FA Cup in 1973 as a second division team, the first to do it in over 50 years, and to this day, only 2 other teams have done it since. Beating the likes of Arsenal and Man City, and then, most impressively, Leeds United in the final, who were classed as one of the strongest teams in Europe at that time. Despite this major win, they had tons of unaddressed problems that needed to be fixed. They temporarily went up and down between the first and second division across the late 70s and 80s. With a strong squad in 1982, they were expected to go back up to the top division, but instead, morale completely collapsed as they were relegated to the third division, the lowest point the club has ever been. The club was in crisis. The manager fell out with the players and finances were tight. However, under new manager Dennis Smith, the team miraculously bounced back, going straight back up to the second division, where they mostly remained until 1999, when they returned to the Prem with a record 105 points. The 2000s were seen as a very up and down decade for Sunderland. On one hand, they shocked everyone by finishing 7th place in their first season back, their best finish since 1955. They doubled down and did the same the next season before completely collapsing. They went from 7th to 17th within a season and were relegated the next. Fans felt betrayed after such a sharp decline. Mick McCarthy helped rebuild them in the Championship and won promotion back after a couple years. However, it didn't last long, as after a poor start, McCarthy was sacked and Sunderland went down once again, having the lowest points ever at the time with 15. After a bit more up and down, Steve Bruce secured safety for Sunderland in 2010. They were here to stay, but in true Sunderland fashion, that wasn't going to be easy. The Great Escape. Not once, not twice, not 3, but 4 times. The 12-13 season saw the club facing the strong chance of relegation. They brought in Di Canio in a shock decision to manage the team. He delivered 3 and helped them survive relegation, finishing 17th. In 2014, Sunderland were bottom with 6 games to go, having the likes of Man City, Chelsea and United to play. They miraculously managed to beat all 3 and then West Brom to safely secure against all odds. In 2015 and 2016, the club were practically relegated before losing just 3 of their last 16 games and grasping survival thanks to Sam Arglais. It was incredible that they had held on for this long. However, their end was always coming, and in 2017, Sunderland finally collapsed and were relegated from the Premier League. It was all okay, as they were expected to bounce back quickly and return the next season. However, what was to happen next would ruin Sunderland forever. A disjointed and demotivated squad that had no real leadership and team qualities left Sunderland with a destructive season. The added factor of chopping and changing managers meant out of all odds they finished bottom of the Championship, dropping down to the 3rd division for just the 2nd time ever. The owner had withdrawn any financial backing and put the club up for sale. The club were in crisis, the lowest point they've ever experienced. But after the club was sold to Stuart Donald, a new rebuild was promised. It wasn't easy. They remained in League One for 3 years, losing out in the playoffs every single time, before finally beating Wycombe Wanderers in the final in 2022 to take them back to the Championship. After an unexpected first season finishing 6th, reality set in as they finished the next season in 16th, rotating between 5 managers in that 23-24 season. However, there was something new brewing. They'd focused on a young squad, no quick fixes, but instead long-term solutions. It was going to take time, but when that time came, they would explode. The 24-25 season saw Sunderland get off to a strong start, topping the league table in 9 games. Despite their average age squad of 23, they managed to grasp a playoff spot in 4th. This was their chance at promotion glory once again. It wasn't going to be easy. Their form dropped off massively at the end of the season, losing all of their last 5 games. They faced an informed Coventry for a place in the final. After winning the first leg, all they had to do was defend their lead. It was tough as they eventually broke down, giving Coventry that much needed equaliser. But that was until the 93rd minute, when Daniel Ballard did the unthinkable.
Plenty of movement inside the box.
They had done it. They were 1 win away from making history and regaining a spot in the Premier League once again. However, they went up against Sheffield United, who were outright favourites to win. Sheffield quickly led and it was looked like time was running out for Sunderland. But then came a chance.
That's a lovely ball, and
They were back in it. All they needed was 1 more goal. The referee would blow the whistle as the game would go to extra time. Or that's what they thought. See, the game wasn't over yet. There were still 30 seconds on the clock. 30 seconds to do the unthinkable.
That's loose though by Moore, and it falls the way of Watson.
When you think of Leeds United, you probably don't think much about them. However, behind the scenes is something nobody even realises. This is team 3 of explaining the entire history of the Premier League. We're doing this with every single team, so if you want to see yours, make sure to subscribe. We have to go back to 1919, where a different team, Leeds City, got into trouble for making illegal payments to players. As a result, they were disbanded as a whole. However, the city of Leeds still wanted to have a football team, thus creating Leeds United and buying Ellen Road for just £250. They joined the 2nd division of the Football League in 1920, where they initially struggled until finishing 2nd in 1924, going up to the 1st division. The early years consisted of a lot of back and forth for Leeds. They managed to secure a consistent few seasons in the 30s, but they never posed a serious threat to any big teams. After World War II, they were hit heavily. The loss of players, damage to the stadium and a limited budget caused Leeds United to completely collapse. They finished in the lower half of the 2nd division and struggled to recover for a few years, taking nearly 10 years before they could return to the top division in 1955. This was mainly thanks to their star man, John Charles, who was clinical in their campaign. Charles continued to lead the team forward as they would go on to finish the top half of the table. He was hungry to obtain success at the highest level. However, after being sold to Juventus for a record-breaking £65,000 in 1957, Leeds struggled and had a sharp decline that would see them go down in 1960. A mix of poor form, financial problems and weak recruitments saw Leeds plummet. They hit their lowest point ever and needed someone to turn it around. And that someone came by the name of Don Revie. Now, Reevy was just a standard player at Leeds who at the age of 33 became the manager of his own club. Little did anyone know that this would be the beginning of one of the greatest runs football has ever seen. The Don Reevy era. He inherited a struggling team that had just narrowly avoided relegation to the 3rd Division. He instantly brought a strict style of management, a strict code of conduct for the players, a new youth programme for younger talents, and switching the club colours from yellow and blue to white to match Real Madrid. Reevy meant no nonsense when it came to his management. He didn't want to just turn Leeds into a competitive team, he wanted to turn them into one of the best teams in the world. People didn't believe him at first, but after gaining promotion to the 1st Division in 1964, momentum began to build. Their intense and disciplined style of play shocked the footballing world as they finished 2nd in their first season back, losing the title on goal difference, as well as finishing runners-up to the FA Cup. This sudden spike wasn't just a purple patch. They came runners-up to the leagues and cups multiple times before finally in 1969 they broke through and won their 1st Division title. Their dominant run continued through the early 70s. They won the Intercities Fair Cup twice, reached the European semi-finals in 1970 before controversially losing to Celtic, and finished runners-up in 1973. They reached multiple FA Cup finals, winning it once, and to top it off, won the league title for a 2nd time in 1974 after going 29 games unbeaten. This turned out to be the last triumph for Don Reevy as he left for the England national team that summer, putting an end to the Don Reevy era. The question now stood, who was going to replace him? They called upon Brian Clough to be the big replacement, which was seen as an odd decision, and that was quickly proven as it was a complete disaster. He didn't respect Don Reevy and used the complete opposite style as him. The players quickly opposed him, and after just 44 days, he was sacked, marking him as one of the most disastrous managers ever. Next came Jimmy Armfield, who managed to restore some order and make the most of his aged squad. He even managed to bring this team to a European Cup final, beating the likes of Barcelona. However, it ended in a controversial 2-0 loss to Bayern Munich. The Leeds fans were furious and began rioting after the final. UEFA resultantly banned them from Europe for 4 years. Despite this shock final, problems still arose. The Reevy era players were aging, replacements failed to match the quality, and managers came and went. They went through 4 managers between 78 and 82. Poor recruitment and outdated tactics led to bigger clubs overtaking them, and in 1982, Leeds United were relegated from the 1st Division. This wasn't the end of it as they struggled in the 2nd Division. The club failed to modernise their tactics. Poor financial decisions led to increased debts as crowd violence became a bigger problem. The club was in crisis. They needed stability, so they appointed Howard Wilkinson, who instantly brought a disciplined and modern structure. He had clear goals of recruiting experienced players as well as investing in the youth. A mix of both began to work as they won their 2nd Division in 1990, and then, just 2 years later, they won their 1st Division title. They had done the unthinkable. Within just a couple of years, Wilkinson had reignited Leeds into a fired up team to be feared upon. However, what was to happen next was something that nobody expected. After the English League rebranded to the Premier League, Leeds struggled to adapt. They didn't win a single away game and scraped survival late into the season. They briefly recovered but couldn't surpass mid-table for the next few years, and after a poor set of results in 1997, Wilkinson was sacked as Leeds United manager. George Green was picked up as his successor, and to be fair to him, he did bring stability to the club, finishing 5th in his first and only full season as he would go to move to Spurs that summer. They brought in David O'Leary, which began a brand new era for Leeds. He brought a bold footballing strategy. With rising talents like Harry Kewell and Rio Ferdinand, O'Leary was ready to achieve great things. They retained consistent top 5 finishes in the Prem despite not winning it. However, all focus was in Europe. Leeds managed to reach the semi-finals of both the UEFA Cup and the Champions League. However, that chance at European glory still wasn't quite there yet. They were praised for their attacking threat across Europe and was considered one of the strongest sides. Little did anyone know that all of this would crumble down as something was going in the background that would ruin Leeds United forever. Under chairman Peter Ridsdale, Leeds had taken out large loans to spend on big name players, gambling with the hopes of Champions League football. However, when they failed to qualify for Champions League, the club were left with loads of debts. The problem escalated as David O'Leary was controversially sacked after failing to bring any trophies. His replacements couldn't replicate what he did, and in 2004, Leeds were relegated from the Premier League, just 2 years after being a Champions League semi-finalist. It didn't improve. Debts were bigger, Elland Road had to be sold for revenue, managers were being sacked, there were limited investments, and in 2007, they cracked. Leeds United went into administration and were relegated to League One for the first time ever. It was a long road back to the Premier Leagues. They had to completely change their structure and go again. It wasn't going to be easy, but after returning to the Championship in 2010, there was a brief sense of hope, but that was until a man called Kevin Bates bought Leeds United. High ticket prices and limited squad investments angered the fans as the team suffered. Between 2012 and 2017, the club went through 5 different managers, and none of them made a difference. Ownership changed in 2014, but it was nearly worse. Constant manager changes, legal trouble, and false promises. Leeds looked lost. Their identity couldn't be seen. However, after Andrea Radrizzani bought the club in 2017, the club finally had hope. He bought back Elland Road and finally did it. Leeds United lifted the Champions League, finishing on 93 points, making their way into the Premier League for the first time in 16 years. History had been made, and it got even better as they finished their first season within the top half of the table. This historic result didn't last long, however, as after a poor set of results the next season, Bielsa was controversially sacked as Leeds manager. They managed to scrape survival on the final day to stay up. However, after Rafinha's departure, they couldn't keep up with the competition and were relegated at the end of the 22-23 season. There was a new hope as the 49ers took over as Leeds owners, and after Leeds earned their place back in the Premier League, will they survive this season? After you've done that, why not click this video right here.